My in-laws are inviting us to dinner tonight, Robert told me yesterday afternoon. He was smiling like a kid, as if nothing bad could ever happen in this world, as if love was enough to protect him from everything. I just nodded. I just said yes. Because that is what I do. I have always said yes. I have always been there. Quiet. Invisible. The mother who doesn't bother anyone. The mother who doesn't ask questions. The mother who accepts whatever she is given. But that night, sitting at that long, cold table, with white tablecloths that looked more like a shroud than a celebration, something inside me began to break. And it wasn't the sound of the plates. It wasn't the clinking of the glasses. It was the silence. That thick silence that falls over a woman when no one looks at her anymore. When no one expects anything from her anymore. When she is just a body taking up space in the chair. One more name on the guest list. The groom's mother. Nothing more. Robert was radiant. He had that light in his eyes that only men in love have. Or blind men. Sometimes it's the same thing. Fiona was by his side. Gorgeous, elegant, with that Italian accent that sounded like music. She moved her hands when she talked. She laughed loudly. She touched Robert's arm with a familiarity that hurt me. Not out of jealousy, but because I no longer received those gestures. It had been years since my son had touched me like that. With affection. With presence. I was furniture in his life, useful when needed, forgettable when not. Eleanor, Fiona's mother, was sitting across from me, tall, imposing, with that perfectly coiffed brown hair and those jewels that sparkled under the dining room light. She was also smiling, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a courtesy smile, one of those you use in pictures, in formal meetings, at wakes. I tried to be nice. I tried to make conversation, but my words fell to the floor like stones. No one picked them up. No one listened to them. Dinner passed slowly. Endless. I ate in silence. I observed. I listened. Robert talked about his plans, about the wedding, about the honeymoon, about the house they were buying. A big house, modern, with a yard. I smiled when he said it would have a room for me, a guest room, because that is what I am now, a guest in my own son's life. Fiona and Eleanor spoke to each other in Italian. Sometimes. Not all the time. Only when they wanted to say something that Robert shouldn't understand yet, or that I should never understand. But I understood. Every word, every syllable, every pause, every contained laugh. Because I lived in Italy. 15 years of my life were in Florence, working, studying, loving, losing. But no one knows that, not even Robert. Because he never asked. He never cared where his mother came from. He only cared that I was there. Quiet. Available. Invisible. Then Robert got up. He said he was going to take the plates to the kitchen. He was always polite, always helpful. I taught him that. To respect. To help. Not to let women carry everything alone. How ironic. Because now he leaves me alone, carrying the weight of this loneliness, of this silent abandonment, of this living death that is being a forgotten mother. And as soon as Robert left the dining room, everything changed. Fiona leaned toward her mother. Eleanor moved closer to her, and they began to speak, in Italian, fast, low, as if they were sharing a delicious secret, and they laughed. My God, how they laughed. With that laugh that is not joy. It is cruelty. It is scorn. It is the sound that evil makes when it feels safe, when it thinks no one is watching it, when it thinks the victim doesn't understand. But I understood. Every word, every insult, every mockery. Fiona said I looked like a country bumpkin, that my hands were rough, that my clothes were cheap, that I smelled old. Eleanor laughed. She said it didn't matter, that soon I wouldn't be a problem, that after the wedding, Robert would do whatever they said, that men in love are easy to manage, that I would be sent to some nursing home, or simply forgotten, like an old dog that is no longer useful. And then they said something more, something that chilled my blood. Fiona said that Robert had a lot of money, more than she thought, that she had seen the documents, the bank accounts, the properties, everything. Eleanor asked how much. Fiona said a number. $200,000 in savings, a paid-off house, investments. Eleanor let out a low laugh. Deep, satisfied, she said that everything would go according to plan, that after the wedding they would transfer everything, little by little, without him realizing it. And when nothing was left, they would disappear, as they always did, as they always did. Those 3 words cut through me like knives, because they meant that this wasn't the first time, that my son wasn't the first, that there were other men, other victims, other broken hearts and empty accounts. And my Robert, my boy, my only son, was about to become one more. An anecdote they would laugh about at some other table, in some other country, with some other foolish man in love. I was still there, sitting, motionless, with my hands in my lap, with my gaze fixed on my empty plate. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I didn't let my face reveal anything. Because I have learned to be invisible. I have learned to disappear. I have learned that women like me survive when they become shadows, when they stop existing for others, when they become nothing. But inside, something was waking up. Something dark, something cold, something that had been sleeping for years, decades, a whole life of silence, of obedience, of acceptance. It was ending. Because a mother can bear anything, any humiliation, any pain. But she cannot stand still when they are going to destroy her son. She cannot remain silent when they are about to steal everything from him, his money, his future, his dignity, his life. Robert came back from the kitchen, smiling, oblivious, happy. He sat down next to Fiona. She stroked his cheek. She said something sweet to him in Italian, something about love, about the future, about eternity. He looked at her as if she were an angel, and I looked at them, at all 3 of them, at the 2 snakes and my lamb, and I thought about how easy it would be to say everything now, to shout, to reveal, to expose. But I didn't, because the moment was not right, because revenge is not a shout, it is a whisper, it is patience, it is strategy, it is waiting for the exact moment for the truth to fall like lightning and destroy everything. Fiona and Eleanor looked at me. For a second, their eyes met mine, and in that instant, I saw something in their faces. It wasn't fear, it was contempt. It was that absolute certainty that I was nothing, that I didn't matter, that I didn't understand, that I was just a silly old woman who would soon be discarded. And I let them think that. I let them believe they had won, that I was harmless, that I was invisible. But they didn't know. They didn't know who I was before I became this silent woman. They didn't know that I had survived worse things, greater losses, deeper pains. They didn't know that I had learned to speak Italian not in a classroom, but in the streets of Florence, in the markets, in the hospitals, in the cemeteries. They didn't know that every word they said, every plan they revealed, every cruel laugh they shared, was etched in my memory like fire on the skin. The dinner ended. We said goodbye. Eleanor gave me a kiss on the cheek. Cold. Empty. Fiona gave me a hug. Brief. Superficial. Robert walked me to the door. He asked me if I had liked the dinner, if I liked his in-laws, if I was happy for him. I said yes. To everything. Because that is what I am supposed to say. Because that is what they expect of me. The mother who doesn't cause problems. The mother who only nods. The mother who disappears when she is no longer needed. But as I walked to my car, under that dark, starless sky, I was no longer the same woman who had arrived. Something had changed. Something had broken. And something new was being born. Something they didn't expect. Something no one expected. Because silent women are not always asleep. Sometimes they are just waiting, observing, planning. And when they wake up, the world trembles. Robert was born in the spring, on a cold, rainy April day. I was 23 years old. I was young, I was strong, I was a different person. A person who no longer exists. A person buried under years of sacrifice and silence. When I held him for the first time, when I felt his warm weight against my chest, when I heard that cry that was pure, new life, I thought nothing bad could ever touch me. I thought love was enough. I thought being a mother was the strongest shield in the world. How wrong I was. His father left when Robert was 4 years old. There were no shouts. There was no violence. Just one morning he got up, made his coffee, looked at me with those empty eyes that hadn't really seen me for a long time, and said he was leaving, that he had met someone else, that he was sorry. But he wasn't sorry. Not really. Men who leave never feel anything, just relief, just the freedom of leaving behind what no longer serves them. And I stayed, with a small child, with a badly paid job, with an apartment that smelled of dampness and broken dreams. I worked at everything, cleaning houses, serving in restaurants, taking care of other people's children while mine waited alone at home. Robert grew up fast. Too fast. Sometimes I would come home and find him asleep on the couch with the television on. Other times he was awake, looking at me with those big eyes that silently asked why I was never there, why I was always late, why I was always tired. But I loved him. God knows I loved him. Every dollar I earned was for him, every extra hour, every double shift, every sleepless night. Everything was for Robert. So he would have clean clothes, so he would eat well, so he would go to school, so he wouldn't feel like he was lacking anything. Even if I lacked everything, even if I disappeared little by little, even if my youth was spent like a candle no one watches burn. When Robert was 12 years old, I got a better job, in an office. I didn't earn much, but it was stable. I could come home earlier, I could be with him, make dinner together, help him with his homework, watch movies on the weekends. Those were good years, quiet years. Robert was a good boy, studious, respectful. Sometimes he would ask me about his father. I would tell him he was far away, that he had his own life, that he had left us because he wasn't happy. Robert felt it. He didn't ask anymore. He learned early that there are silences that are better left unbroken. Years passed. Robert finished school. He went to college. He studied business administration. He got a job at a big company. He started earning well, much better than me. He bought a car. He moved to a bigger apartment. He invited me to dinner on Sundays. Sometimes he called me during the week. He would ask how I was, if I needed anything. I always said no, that I was fine. Not to worry, because that's what mothers do. They protect, even if it is from their own need. Then he met Fiona. It was 2 years ago, on a business trip to Miami. She worked at the hotel where he was staying. That's what he told me. That she was an events coordinator. That she was Italian. That she spoke 4 languages. That she was beautiful and intelligent. That he had never met anyone like her. I listened. I smiled. I said I was happy for him. But something in my chest tightened. Something told me this wasn't good, that this wouldn't end well. The first time I saw her was 3 months later. Robert brought her to dinner. Fiona entered my house like someone entering a place that doesn't deserve their presence. She looked around with those critical eyes. She barely touched my hand when I greeted her. She smiled, but it was a cold smile, a forced smile. Robert didn't notice anything. He was too busy looking at her, too lost in that enchantment that blinds men when they think they have found the perfect woman. During dinner, Fiona spoke little to me. She answered with one-word replies. She looked at her phone. She spoke to Robert in English, sometimes in Italian. Soft words, verbal caresses. He melted. I observed. I tried to find something genuine in her, something real, something that would justify the light in my son's eyes. But I found nothing. I only saw a calculating woman, a woman who knew exactly what to say, what to do, how to move, how to conquer. When they left, Robert hugged me. He told me he loved Fiona, that she was the one, that he had finally found someone special. I told him she seemed very nice, that I was glad to see him happy. I lied, because that is what mothers do when they know the truth is going to hurt, when they know their children aren't ready to hear, when they know they wouldn't believe them anyway. The following months were strange. Robert started visiting me less. The calls became shorter, more spaced out. He always had plans with Fiona. He was always busy. When I asked him how things were going, he only talked about her, about how wonderful she was, about how well they got along, about the places they went, about the perfect life they were building. I listened. I nodded. I swallowed the pain of being replaced, of becoming a secondary character in my own son's life. Then one day Robert came to my house with news. He was nervous, excited. He had that energy of men who are about to take a big step. He sat me down on the couch. He took my hands. He told me he had proposed marriage to Fiona, that she had said yes, that they would get married in 6 months, that he wanted me to be the first to know. I hugged him. I congratulated him. I told him I was very happy for him, and a part of me was, because he was my son, because I loved him, because I wanted to see him happy. But another part of me, a dark and deep part, felt fear. I felt that something was wrong, that all this was too fast, too perfect, too planned. I asked him if he had met Fiona's family. He said no, that they lived in Italy, that they would come for the wedding, that Fiona didn't have much contact with them because she had been travelling a lot for work, but that her mother Eleanor would come the following week, that she would stay a month to help with the preparations, that she wanted to meet me. And so it was. Eleanor arrived, tall, elegant, with that air of superiority that people who believe money is the only thing that matters have. She greeted me coldly. She sized me up with her eyes, like someone looking at an old piece of furniture and deciding whether it is worth keeping or throwing away. I tried to be nice. I tried to make conversation. I tried to build a bridge. But she wasn't interested. For her, I was invisible, insignificant. The poor mother of the groom, someone who had to be tolerated out of courtesy, nothing more. The months of preparation were a silent hell. I didn't participate in anything. Fiona and Eleanor decided everything: the venue, the decor, the menu, the music, the guest list. Robert asked for my opinion sometimes, but it was only out of obligation. Everything was already decided. I was just a name on the list. The groom's mother, sitting at some distant table, dressed in what they considered appropriate. Quiet, invisible, forgettable. But I observed. I saw how Fiona controlled Robert, how she pushed him away from me, how every time I called, she found a reason why he couldn't talk much, how every time I suggested something, she had a better idea, how little by little my son was becoming a stranger, someone I no longer recognized, someone who no longer needed me. And then that dinner arrived. That damn dinner one day before the wedding. The dinner where everything changed. Where I stopped being the invisible and quiet mother. Where I discovered that my son was not only being pushed away from me, he was being destroyed, stolen, emptied. And I was the only one who could see it. The only one who could save him. The only one who understood every word of that sinister plan that Fiona and Eleanor had woven with so much patience. That night, when I returned home, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, going over every word I had heard, every laugh, every detail of the plan. And I knew I couldn't remain silent. Not this time. Not when my son was about to lose everything. Not when I was the only one who had the power to stop it. Because I was not just a forgotten mother. I was a woman who had survived, who had fought, who had learned that silence is not weakness, it is strategy. And now it was time to wake up. I couldn't sleep that night, nor the next, nor the one after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard their voices, those sweet, poisonous voices speaking in Italian, planning, calculating, laughing at my son as if he were a game, as if destroying someone's life were just another day at work for them, as if my Robert were just one more number on their list of victims. I got out of bed at the hour of 0:03. The apartment was silent. That thick silence that only people who live alone know, who sleep alone, who cry alone. I went to the kitchen. I made coffee. I sat at the table where Robert had done his homework so many times as a child, where we had eaten breakfast together on Sundays, where I had watched the man who was now about to marry a lie grow up. I took out an old notebook, one of those you keep for years without knowing why, and I started writing. Every word I remembered. Every phrase I had heard in that dining room. I wrote everything down, in Italian first. Then I translated it into Spanish. I needed to see it. I needed to read it. I needed to confirm that it hadn't been a nightmare, that I had really heard what I thought I had heard. Fiona had said that Robert had $200,000 saved, that she had seen the documents, the bank statements, everything. Eleanor asked if she was sure. Fiona said yes, that he had shown her everything when they bought the house together, that he trusted her completely, that he was a foolish man in love like all the others, like always, like every time. Eleanor had laughed, that laugh that haunted me in the dark, and she said the plan was still the same. Get married, wait 3 months, enough time for him not to suspect, then start transferring the money, little by little. $5,000 here, $10,000 there, always with excuses. A family emergency in Italy, an investment business, a unique opportunity. Men in love always say yes. They always trust. They always give everything. And when nothing was left, they would disappear. Fiona would file for divorce. She would claim incompatibility. She would take her share of the assets. The house they had bought together was in both their names. That meant half was hers. And with a good lawyer, she could keep more, much more. Eleanor said they had contacts, that they had done it before, that they knew exactly how to move every piece. And then Fiona said something that broke my heart. She said that the only good thing was that I wouldn't be a problem, that I was a poor, uneducated old woman, that I had no influence over Robert, that I would probably end up in a nursing home when I could no longer take care of myself, that no one would listen to a woman like me. Eleanor agreed. She said that mothers like me are easy to ignore, that sons always choose their wives over their mothers. Always. I read my notes over and over again. Every word was a dagger, not only because they were going to rob my son, but because they were right about one thing. Robert had chosen her, not consciously, not with malice, but he had left me behind. He had turned me into a ghost in his life, and now that ghost was the only person who could save him. The next day I called Robert. It was Sunday. We usually had lunch together on Sundays, but it had been weeks since we had. He answered after several rings. He sounded distracted, busy. I asked if we could meet. He said he was with Fiona, buying things for the honeymoon, that they were very busy, that the wedding was in 5 days. I told him I understood, that I just wanted to see him for a moment, that we hadn't talked alone for a long time. There was a silence. Long, awkward. Then he said maybe, in the afternoon, that he would call me. I hung up. He didn't call me. That night I sent him a text message. He didn't reply until the next day. It said he was sorry, that he had been exhausted, that he would see me at the wedding, that everything was crazy with the preparations. I read that message, and I knew I had already lost him, that Fiona had him completely, that I was just a nuisance to be kept at a distance. But I couldn't give up. I couldn't let this happen. So I did something I had never done, something I was ashamed to even think about. I went to the bank where Robert had his accounts. I didn't think I would achieve anything. I didn't have access to his information. I didn't have any legal right. But I knew one of the employees, Martha, an older woman who had worked there for 30 years. I had cleaned her house for years before getting my office job. We were friends, or something like it. I found her at her desk. She was surprised to see me. It had been a long time since we had seen each other. I told her I needed a favor, that it wasn't legal, that I would understand if she said no, but that it was for my son, that he was in danger. Martha looked at me with those tired eyes that people who have seen too much have. She asked me what I needed. I told her I just wanted to confirm how much money Robert had in his accounts. Nothing more. I didn't want to make any moves, just to know. Martha hesitated. She looked around. Then she sighed. She told me to wait. She went to her computer. She typed something. She frowned. She wrote something on a piece of paper and discreetly handed it to me. The number was worse than I thought. Robert had $240,000, not $200,000. $240,000. Years of work, of saving, of sacrifice. All there. Waiting to be stolen by 2 women who saw him as an ATM with feelings. Martha asked me if I was okay. I nodded. I thanked her. I left the bank with trembling legs. That afternoon I searched the internet. I spent hours reading about marriage fraud, about women who married men for money, about international schemes, about how they worked. The patterns were always the same. Beautiful women, foreigners, perfect stories, distant families, quick weddings, absolute trust. And then the disappearance, the divorce, the ruin. I found forums, stories, testimonials, destroyed men telling how they had lost everything, their savings, their houses, their dignity. Some never recovered. Some filed for bankruptcy. Some simply disappeared, swallowed by the shame and pain of having been so blind, of having trusted so much. of having loved the wrong person. And then I found something, a news story from 3 years ago, in a newspaper in Argentina, about two Italian women arrested for marriage fraud. They had swindled 5 men, more than $500,000 in total. When I opened the attached photo, my heart stopped. It was them. Fiona and Eleanor, younger, with different names. But it was them. The same eyes, the same smile, the same pose of calculated innocence. I read the full article, trembling. They had been arrested, prosecuted. But something had gone wrong in the trial. A legal technicality, lack of strong evidence. They let them go. They disappeared afterwards, without a trace. And now they were here, in my city, about to marry my son, about to steal everything from him, about to leave him empty and broken like those other men. I printed the article. I printed the photo. I printed everything. My hands were trembling so much I could barely hold the papers. I had the proof. I had the evidence that Fiona and Eleanor were not who they said they were. That this was not love. It was a crime, a meticulous plan, a robbery disguised as romance. But then I realized something. If I showed this to Robert now, 5 days before the wedding, he wouldn't believe me. He would think I was jealous, that I was making things up to ruin his happiness, that I was a possessive mother who couldn't let go of her son. Fiona had done a perfect job of alienating him from me, subtly poisoning our relationship, making me look like a sad and obsolete figure in his life. And even if he believed me, even if he saw the evidence, she would find an explanation. She would say it was a mistake, that they were other people, that it was a confusion. And he would want to believe her, not me, because love does that. It blinds, it deafens, it kills the instinct for survival. I sat on the floor of my living room with the papers scattered around, and I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried since Robert's father left us. I cried for my son, for his innocence, for his blind trust, for all the pain he was about to suffer. And I cried for myself, for being invisible, for not having a voice, for not being able to protect him even though I held the truth in my hands. But then something changed, in the midst of that crying, in the midst of that despair. I felt something new, something I hadn't felt in years. Fury, pure, burning rage. I was not going to let this happen. I was not going to sit and watch them destroy my son. I was not going to be the weak and invisible mother they thought I was. If Robert wouldn't listen to me now, then I would have to wait. I would have to be smarter, more patient. I would have to let the wedding happen, let them feel safe, victorious. And then, when they least expected it, when they thought they had won, I would strike. With the truth, with the evidence, with the full weight of a mother who has nothing to lose except her son. Because they made a mistake. A fatal mistake. They thought I was invisible. They thought I didn't understand. They thought I didn't matter. But I had heard everything. I knew everything. And now I had proof. I had time. And I had the most powerful advantage of all. They didn't know that I knew. The next day, I called Alexandra, my only true friend, the only person in this world who had always been there. We met 30 years ago, working in the same factory. She was also a single mother. She had also been abandoned. She had also raised her children alone. We shared that silent pain that only women who have had to be both father and mother at the same time understand. Women who have had to be strong when all they wanted was to break down. Alexandra lives 3 blocks from my apartment, in an equally old building, equally sad. When I arrived, she was making tea, always making tea. She says it's the only thing that calms her nerves. I sat in her kitchen, The same kitchen where we had cried together so many times, where we had celebrated our children's birthdays, when we didn't have money for big parties, where we had planned how to survive each month on wages that never stretched far enough. I told her everything, every detail, from the dinner to what I had heard in Italian, from the newspaper article to the $240,000 Robert had in the bank. Alexandra listened in silence. She didn't interrupt me. She didn't judge me. She just listened with that patience that people who know what real pain is have. The pain that has no words. The pain that can only be shared in silence. When I finished, she put her cup down on the table. She looked at me with those tired but strong eyes, and she asked me what I was going to do. I told her I didn't know, that I had the evidence, that I knew the truth, but that Robert wouldn't listen to me, that they had him completely under their control, that if I tried to stop the wedding now, I would only make my son hate me, make him blame me, make him push me away forever. Alexandra nodded. Then she told me something I will never forget. She told me that mothers have always had to fight battles that no one sees, that we have always had to protect our children in ways they never understand, that sometimes love means doing things that break our hearts, things that turn us into the villains of their stories, but that a true mother does not seek to be loved. She seeks for her children to survive. She asked me if I remembered when she had to take her oldest son out of that house where he lived with his girlfriend, the girlfriend who hit him, who manipulated him, who had isolated him from everyone. Her son hated her for months. He blamed her for ruining his life, for destroying his relationship. But Alexandra didn't stop. She kept fighting. She kept being there. Until one day her son woke up. He saw the truth, and he thanked her for saving him, for loving him enough to be the bad guy in the story. I told her this was different, that Robert was an adult, that he was 35 years old, that I couldn't just take him out of there. Alexandra smiled, a sad smile, and she told me that then I had to be smarter, more strategic, that I couldn't attack head on. I had to wait for the perfect moment, the moment where the truth was so obvious that Robert couldn't deny it, where the evidence was so overwhelming that there was no room for doubt. That afternoon, Alexandra and I made a plan, a simple but effective plan. I would not stop the wedding. I would let it happen. I would act like the perfect mother, smiling, happy, invisible as always. But in the meantime, I would investigate. I would gather more evidence. I would follow Fiona and Eleanor. I would document every suspicious move, every conversation, every strange meeting. Alexandra knew someone, a private investigator. His name was Ted. He had been a police officer for 20 years before retiring. Now he worked independently. He did discreet investigations, surveillance, information gathering. Alexandra gave me his number. She told me I could trust him, that he was a good man, that he would understand my situation. I called Ted that very night. I explained everything to him. I told him I didn't have much money, that I only had my savings, $3,000 that I had saved for years for emergencies. Ted told me it was enough, that he would do what he could, that he understood what it was like to have a child in danger. He also had children. He also knew what it meant to protect them. We met the next day at a coffee shop near downtown. Ted was a man in his 60s, grey hair, face marked by time. But his eyes were sharp, attentive. The eyes of someone who had seen the dark side of people, who knew how to recognize danger, who knew when someone was lying. I showed him everything, the newspaper article, the photos, the notes of what I had heard at dinner. Ted read everything carefully. He took notes, he asked questions. He asked for addresses, full names, Details about Fiona and Eleanor, about Robert, about the wedding, about everything. Then he looked at me and said something that chilled my blood. He told me that it was probably too late to stop the wedding, that these women were professionals, that they had years of experience, that they knew exactly how to manipulate legal situations, how to disappear without a trace, but that if we acted quickly after the wedding, if we gathered enough evidence before they started stealing the money, we could stop them. He explained that he needed strong evidence, not just the old article. He needed proof that Fiona and Eleanor were still the same people from the article. Fake documents, travel records, connections with other frauds. And above all, he needed to record them, capture them admitting their plan. That would be what would convince Robert. That would be what would destroy them legally. I asked him how. How could we record them if they distrusted everyone? If they only spoke to each other in Italian? If I was invisible to them? Ted thought for a moment. Then he told me that that invisibility was my greatest advantage. That people don't watch what they say in front of those they consider insignificant. That if I could get close to them again, if I could create a situation where they felt comfortable talking, we could capture everything. He gave me a small device, an audio recorder, the size of a lighter. He explained how to use it, how to activate it without anyone noticing. He told me to carry it with me always, that if any opportunity arose to be near Fiona and Eleanor, I should turn it on, to record everything, that it didn't matter if it was in Italian. We would translate that later. The important thing was to have their voices, their words, their confession. He also gave me his card. He told me to call him if I saw anything suspicious. Anything. Any strange movement, any out-of-place meeting. He would start investigating their backgrounds, to look for connections with other cases, to track their past. He promised me he would do everything possible to protect my son. When I left that coffee shop, I felt different. I was no longer just a desperate mother. I was a woman with a plan, with an ally, with tools. I was no longer alone in this battle. I had Alexandra. I had Ted. And I had something more important. I had purpose. I had a mission. Save my son, no matter the cost. The days before the wedding passed slowly and painfully. Robert barely called me. When he did, he sounded distracted, stressed. He said there were 1,000 things to do, that Fiona was nervous, that everything had to be perfect. I told him everything would be fine, that it would be a beautiful day. I lied, because I knew it wouldn't be beautiful. I knew it would be the beginning of his destruction. Fiona called me 2 days before the wedding. It surprised me. She never called me. She told me they needed me to arrive early on the day of the ceremony, that there was a family gathering beforehand. Only close family. Her, Eleanor, Robert, and me. She told me it was an Italian tradition, a family blessing before the wedding. I accepted. Of course I accepted. Because I knew that could be my opportunity. I told Ted. He told me that this meeting was perfect, to carry the recorder activated from the moment I entered, that it didn't matter how long it lasted, to record everything, that they would probably speak freely in Italian, believing I didn't understand anything, that was our golden opportunity. The night before the wedding, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that could go wrong, about everything I was about to lose. Because if this didn't work, if I couldn't stop them, I would lose Robert forever. Not just his money, not just his future. I would lose him, my son, the only person who had given me purpose in this life. But I also thought about what would happen if I did nothing, if I stayed silent, if I let this happen without a fight. Robert would lose everything, his money, his trust, his ability to love. He would become another broken man, another victim, another sad story on the internet, and I would have to live with that guilt, with knowing that I could have saved him and didn't. So I made a decision that would change everything. It didn't matter if Robert hated me afterwards. It didn't matter if he never forgave me. It didn't matter if I became the villain in his story. I would save him, because that's what mothers do. They don't seek applause. They don't seek gratitude. They seek for their children to survive. Even if it means sacrificing themselves, even if it means disappearing, even if it means dying a little in the process. I got up at dawn. I dressed carefully, a simple dress, grey, discreet, the kind of dress a mother wears who doesn't want to draw attention. I put the recorder in my purse. I checked it 3 times to make sure it worked. I practiced how to turn it on without looking, how to keep it close without being obvious, how to be invisible, while recording everything. Before leaving, I looked at myself in the mirror, and I saw a woman I no longer recognized. A woman who was 61 years old, who looked older, tired, worn out. But in her eyes there was something new, something that hadn't been there before. Determination, strength, fire. Because invisible women are not always asleep. Sometimes they are just waiting for the moment to wake up. And that moment had arrived. The morning of the wedding dawned grey. Heavy clouds covered the sky as if the universe knew something bad was about to happen. I took a cab to the hotel where the ceremony would be held. An elegant place. Too elegant for me. Too expensive. Too perfect. The kind of place where people who have money get married, or people who plan to steal it. I arrived 30 minutes before the agreed time for the family meeting. My hands were trembling. I had checked the recorder 5 times on the way. It was working. Hidden in my purse, ready to capture every word, every confession, every mistake Fiona and Eleanor might make. The receptionist directed me to go up to the 3rd floor. Suite 312. The bridal suite, where Fiona and Eleanor were getting ready, where we were supposed to have that family blessing, that Italian tradition that was probably another lie, another trick to maintain appearances. I knocked on the door. Eleanor opened it. She was wearing a cream-coloured silk robe. Her hair was perfectly styled, even though the ceremony was still hours away. She looked at me up and down, as always, with that barely disguised contempt. She let me in without smiling, without really greeting me. Just a nod, like someone letting in a person they have no choice but to tolerate. Fiona was sitting in front of a huge mirror. A makeup artist was working on her face. She saw me in the reflection. She raised a hand, a minimal greeting. Cold. She continued talking on the phone in Italian, something about flowers, about the decor. Her voice was sweet, charming, the voice of a happy bride, the voice of an accomplished actress. I asked about Robert. Eleanor told me he was in another room getting ready, that we would see him during the ceremony, that this meeting was just for the women of the family, to share an intimate moment before the big day. I nodded. I sat on a couch near the window. I discreetly took the recorder out of my purse. I placed it on my lap, covered by my shawl, activated, recording. The makeup artist finished and left. Fiona stood up. She admired herself in the mirror. She turned. She smiled. She was beautiful. I have to admit it. She was a beautiful woman, the kind of beauty that deceives, that seduces, that makes men forget to use reason, that makes my son give up his entire life without asking questions. Eleanor poured champagne. 3 glasses. She offered me one. I took it even though I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to cloud my mind. I needed to be alert, conscious, recording every second. But refusing would have been strange. It would have drawn attention. So I took the glass. I held it. I barely wet my lips. Fiona raised her glass. She made a toast, in Italian, to the family, to love, to the future. Beautiful words, empty words. Eleanor toasted with her. I did too, pretending I understood a few words, pretending I was just another excited guest, another happy mother, another fool who knew nothing. Then Eleanor locked the door. I heard the sound of the latch. My heart raced, but I remained calm. I kept my face serene, expressionless, the face of a woman who understands nothing, who sees nothing, who doesn't matter. Fiona and Eleanor sat together on the couch across from me. They began to speak, in Italian, fast, confident, thinking I was just a piece of furniture, an object without ears, without a mind, without importance. And that's when everything changed, when they started to reveal more than they had planned. Eleanor asked if Robert had already signed the house papers. Fiona said yes, that everything was in both their names, 50-50, that the house was worth $300,000, that when they divorced, she would keep half, $150,000, plus the $240,000 from the accounts, that in total it would be almost $400,000. Eleanor laughed. She said it was the best job they had done so far. Fiona said Robert was perfect, naive, in love, controllable, that he never suspected anything, that he believed every word she said, that it was pathetic how men became stupid when they thought they had found true love. Eleanor agreed. She said all men were the same. That ego was their weakness, that they felt special when a beautiful woman chose them, that they never wondered why. Then they talked about me. Fiona said I was the only problem, but a minor problem, that I had no influence, that Robert had barely called me, that after the wedding he would see me even less, that I would eventually disappear from his life completely. Like all annoying parents, like all useless people. Eleanor said it was better that way, that old mothers always cause problems, that it's better to cut them off from the beginning, that Robert was already learning to prioritize his wife over his mother, that was exactly what they needed. A man without ties, without family to ask questions, without anyone who could interfere when they started moving the money. I was still there, sitting, motionless, with the hidden recorder capturing every word, every laugh, every detail of their diabolical plan. My heart was beating so fast I thought they might hear it. But I kept my face empty, my gaze lost, as if I was thinking about something else, as if I didn't understand anything they were saying. Fiona looked at her watch. She said it was time to end this, that the ceremony started in 2 hours, that they needed to finish getting ready. Eleanor nodded. They stood up. I did too. Fiona smiled at me, that fake, perfect smile. She told me in Spanish to thank you for coming, that it meant a lot to have me there, that I was important to Robert. Lies. All lies. But I smiled. I said I was happy to be there, that it was a beautiful day. I left that room with shaky legs, with the recorder burning in my purse, with the certainty that I had everything I needed, their voices, their complete plan, their confession. Now I just had to decide when to use it, when to detonate that bomb that would destroy everything. I went down to the hotel lobby with the recorder burning in my purse as if it were a radioactive secret. My hands were trembling. I needed to get out, to breathe, to think. But I couldn't leave. The ceremony was in less than 2 hours. I had to stay. I had to act as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just heard the complete confession of 2 criminals planning to destroy my son. I found a restroom on the first floor. I locked myself in one of the stalls. I took out the recorder. I stopped it. I checked it. It had recorded everything. 42 minutes of audio. 42 minutes of pure evidence, of undeniable truth. I put the device away again. I hid it at the bottom of my purse. Safer than my own life. I called Ted. He answered on the second ring. I told him I had the recording, that it had worked, that they had spoken freely, that I had everything, the numbers, the plan, the dates, everything. Ted congratulated me. He told me that was exactly what we needed, that now we had to decide when to act. I asked him what I should do. Should I stop the wedding now? Show the recording to Robert before he got married? Before it was too late? Ted was silent for a moment. Then he told me something I didn't expect. He told me no, that if I stopped the wedding now, Fiona and Eleanor could escape. They could deny everything. They could say the recording was manipulated, that it was a misunderstanding, that I was making things up because I didn't want my son to get married. He explained that we needed something more. We needed evidence that they actually tried to steal the money, not just words, actions, bank movements, transfer attempts. That would sink them legally, that would make it impossible for them to escape. He told me to let the wedding happen, to wait, to watch, that as soon as they tried to move the money, I should call him. Then we would act. I hung up feeling empty. I knew Ted was right, but the idea of seeing my son marry that woman, of seeing him promise eternal love to someone who only wanted to destroy him, of remaining silent while he handed over his life to a lie. It was unbearable. It was like watching an accident in slow motion, like knowing someone is going to die and not being able to scream, not being able to warn, not being able to stop anything. I left the restroom. I went up to the hall where the ceremony would be. People were already arriving. Elegant guests, well-dressed, smiling, oblivious to everything. Soft music was playing in the background. White flowers decorated every corner. Everything was perfect. Everything was beautiful. Everything was a lie. I found my seat. Table 7, far from the altar, far from the head table, where the people who don't matter sit. The filler guests, the names on the list who are only there out of obligation. I sat alone. No one came to greet me. No one came over to talk. I was the groom's mother, but I was invisible, forgotten, irrelevant. The music changed. The wedding march began. Everyone stood up. I did too. Robert entered first, my son, my boy, nervous, happy, with that smile that broke my heart. Because it was the smile of someone who believes their life is beginning, who doesn't know it is actually ending. Then she entered. Fiona, walking arm in arm with Eleanor because she didn't have a father to give her away. Or so she said. She was dressed in white. Of course. The dress was long, elegant, perfect, like everything about her, like the whole lie she had built. The guests sighed. They murmured how beautiful she looked. I only saw a thief, a predator, a snake wrapped in lace. Robert looked at her as if she were a miracle, as if he couldn't believe his luck. Poor thing. He didn't know it wasn't luck. It was a trap, a calculated plan, a hunt where he was the prey and had already fallen into the net. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke of love, of fidelity, of commitment. Beautiful words said in a grotesque context. Because there was no love there was no fidelity. There was no real commitment. There was only acting. There was only fraud. There was only evil disguised as romance. When it came time for the vows, I felt like I was drowning. Robert promised to love her forever, in sickness and in health, for richer and for poorer. How ironic. Soon there would only be poverty, because she would take everything. Fiona also said her vows. Her voice was soft, emotional, perfect. Tears adorned her cheeks, rehearsed tears, empty tears. The officiant declared them husband and wife. They kissed. The guests applauded. I applauded too, because I had to, because I was still invisible, because I was still acting. But inside I was dying. Inside I was screaming. Inside I was praying this was a nightmare I would wake up from soon. The reception was worse. Robert and Fiona danced their first dance as husband and wife. He looked at her with adoration. She smiled with triumph. Eleanor watched from her table with satisfaction. Like someone watching a plan execute perfectly, like someone who knows they have already won, that everything is already secured, that it's only a matter of time. Robert came to my table once. He hugged me. He told me he was happy, that Fiona was the best thing that had ever happened to him, that he had finally found his place in the world. I told him I was happy for him, that he looked very happy, that I loved him. He smiled, he kissed my forehead, and he left. Back to his new wife, back to his new life, away from me. Fiona never approached my table, not once. Eleanor didn't either. I was air. I was a shadow. I was nothing, exactly as they wanted, exactly as they had planned. While they celebrated, while they toasted, while they laughed with the guests, I remained seated, observing, waiting, mentally recording every detail, every gesture, every knowing glance between mother and daughter. The party ended around midnight. Robert and Fiona left in an elegant car toward the airport. Honeymoon in Italy. 2 weeks, Rome, Florence, Venice. Places I knew, places where I had lived, but they didn't know that. That was my secret, my weapon, my invisible power. I took a cab back home. The apartment was dark, cold, silent. I sat on the couch without turning on the lights. I took out the recorder. I held it in my hands. This small thing contained the truth. It contained the future. It contained my son's salvation or destruction. It was up to me to decide when to use it, how to use it, if I would have the courage to do it, when the time came. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake thinking about Robert as a child, how he used to hug me before bed, how he used to tell me I was his favorite person in the world, how he promised me he would always take care of me. Child's promises. Promises you forget when you grow up, when life takes you away, when other people take the place that was once yours. But I hadn't forgotten my promises. I promised to protect him the day he was born. I promised to always be there. I promised to save him from any danger. And that promise was still valid, even if he no longer needed me, even if he no longer saw me, even if I was invisible in his life. I was still his mother, and mothers do not abandon, never. The 2 weeks Robert spent in Italy were the longest of my life. Every day was an agony. Every night was a hell of dark thoughts. I imagined Fiona showing him Rome, the same streets where I had walked 30 years ago, the same places where I had been young, where I had loved, where I had lost. She walked through my past without knowing it, and I was here, waiting, planning, preparing for the moment when everything would explode. Ted called me every other day. He kept me informed of his investigations. He had found more information about Fiona and Eleanor. They were not real Italians. They had been born in Argentina. Their real names were different. They had changed identities 3 times in the last 10 years. They had been in Chile, in Peru, in Colombia. Always the same pattern, Always the same crime. Men in love, quick weddings, emptied accounts, disappearances. Ted had contacted two of the previous victims. Devastated men who had lost everything. One lost $120,000. The other lost almost $200,000. Both said the same thing, that they never saw it coming, that Fiona was perfect, that the love seemed real, that when they discovered the truth, it was already too late. The money had disappeared. They had disappeared. And they were ruined, destroyed, ashamed. One of them tried to commit suicide. The other lost his house, his job, his dignity. Now they lived small, broken lives, trying to rebuild themselves from the ashes. When Ted told me this, I cried. I cried thinking that this could be Robert's future. My son turned into another broken man, another statistic, another victim no one would remember. But that was not going to happen. Not while I was breathing, not while I had the recording, not while I held the truth in my hands. Robert would return from that honeymoon happy, in love, blind. But I would be ready, waiting for the exact moment, the moment Fiona made her first mistake, her first move toward the money. Ted also taught me something crucial. He showed me how to monitor Robert's bank accounts without direct access. Martha, my friend from the bank, helped us. She would notify us if there were strange movements, large transfers, changes in beneficiaries, anything suspicious. It was illegal. We knew it. But sometimes saving someone requires breaking certain rules. Sometimes maternal love exists outside the law. Robert returned from Italy on a Tuesday afternoon. He called me that night. He sounded happy, relaxed. He told me about the trip, about the cities they visited, about the food, about how well they had gotten along. Fiona yelled something in the background. A greeting. Fake. Forced. Robert laughed. He told me she sent her regards, that we would all see each other soon. I said yes, that I would love to. Lie. I didn't want to see her ever again, but I had to keep acting. 3 weeks passed. Robert didn't call me much. When he did, the conversations were short, superficial. He said he was busy, that they were adjusting to married life, that they were fixing up the house, making plans, building their future. I listened. I asked few questions. I didn't want to pressure him. I didn't want Fiona to feel I was a threat. I needed them to continue seeing me as what I had always been. Invisible, harmless, forgettable. Then Martha's call came. It was a Friday morning. Her voice sounded nervous. She told me there was activity in Robert's account. A transfer. $50,000 to an offshore account, the Cayman Islands. Martha gave me all the details, the account number, the date, the exact time. I thanked her. I told her she had saved my son. She told me she hoped so, that she would pray for us. I called Ted immediately. I gave him the information. He told me it was time, that we had everything now, the recording, the background checks, and now the actual attempt at theft. He told me to contact Robert, to ask to see him urgently, not to tell him why, just that it was important, that it was about his life, his future, everything. I called Robert. He answered after several rings. He sounded busy. I told him I needed to see him, that it was urgent, that I couldn't explain it over the phone. He sighed. He said he was busy, that he had meetings. I told him please, that it was the first time in years I had asked him for something like this, that I really needed to. There was a silence, then he agreed. He told me we would meet the next day, in the afternoon, at a coffee shop near his office. That night I prepared everything, the recording on a flash drive, the documents Ted had compiled, the newspaper articles, the photos, the statements from the other victims, everything organized, everything ready to be shown, to be revealed, to destroy the lie that had enveloped my son for 2 years. I didn't sleep. I stayed up rehearsing what I would tell him, how I would begin, how I would explain that I had been investigating, that I had recorded a private conversation, that I had violated his privacy, his trust, how I would make him understand that everything I had done was out of love, for protection, for that maternal instinct that cannot stand still when its child is in danger. I also thought about how he would react, if he would believe me, if he would get angry, if he would think I was crazy, jealous, making things up. I knew Fiona had done a perfect job of alienating him from me, making me look like a problematic mother, possessive, unable to let go of her son. Robert probably already had that image of me in his head. Fiona had probably already planted those seeds of doubt. But I had something stronger than her manipulations. I had the truth. I had proof. I had Fiona's voice confessing her plan. I had the bank movements. I had everything. And the truth always wins. Eventually. Painfully. But it wins. Saturday arrived. I dressed carefully. I put all the documents in my purse. I put the flash drive with the recording in a special pocket, close to my heart, as if it were the most valuable thing I had. And it was. It was my son's salvation. It was the end of the nightmare. It was the moment when I would stop being invisible. I took the bus to the coffee shop. I arrived 30 minutes early. I ordered a coffee that I didn't drink. I sat at a back table. I waited. Every minute was eternal. Every second brought me closer to the moment when everything would change, where my relationship with Robert would break or be saved, where I would become his heroine or his enemy. There was no middle ground. There was no turning back. Robert entered exactly at the agreed time. He saw me. He walked toward me. He looked tired. He had dark circles under his eyes. His face was thinner, as if he wasn't sleeping well, as if something was consuming him inside. He sat across from me. He asked me what was wrong. Why all the urgency? What was so important that it couldn't wait? I looked at him. My son. My boy. Now a 35-year-old man who thought his life was perfect, who thought he had found love, who didn't know he was married to a criminal. I took a deep breath. I took the flash drive out of my purse. I placed it on the table between us, and I said the words that would change everything. The words I had rehearsed 1,000 times. The words that would save him or destroy me. I said, Robert, I need you to listen to something. I need you to trust me, even if you haven't in a long time. Because what I am going to show you is going to hurt. It is going to shatter you. But it will save your life. Robert looked at me confused. He took the flash drive between his fingers. He looked at it as if it were something dangerous, as if he knew that what it contained would change everything. He asked me what it was, what was going on, why I was acting so strange. I told him I needed my computer, that he had to listen to something, that after that, everything would make sense. I took my old laptop out of my purse. I turned it on. My hands were trembling so much I could barely hold it. Robert kept looking at me. There was something in his eyes. Worry, fear, as if a part of him already knew that what was coming was terrible. I inserted the flash drive. I opened the audio file. Before playing it, I looked at him one last time. I told him I loved him, that I had always loved him, that everything I had done was to protect him. He shifted, nervous. I said the recording was in Italian. that I understood every word, that I would explain everything to him afterwards. But that first, he needed to listen. I pressed play. The voices of Fiona and Eleanor filled the space between us, clear, sharp, confessing everything. Robert frowned. He didn't understand the language. He looked at me, seeking an explanation. I raised a hand. I asked him to wait, to keep listening. The recording continued, Fiona talking about the $240,000, Eleanor laughing, planning how to transfer the money, how to disappear, how they had done this before, how Robert was just another foolish man in love. I stopped the recording. Robert was pale. He asked me what they were talking about. Whose voices were those? Although I think he already knew. I think his heart was already telling him the truth his mind didn't want to accept. I told him they were Fiona and Eleanor, that the recording was from the day of his wedding, in the hotel suite, that I had been there, that I had heard them planning to rob him, destroy him, leave him with nothing. Robert shook his head. He said it was impossible, that it had to be a mistake, that I didn't understand Italian, that I had probably misinterpreted something. His voice trembled, desperate, clinging to the lie because the truth was too painful. I told him I lived in Italy for 15 years, that I spoke the language perfectly, that I understood every word, every plan, every detail of how they planned to destroy him. He fell silent, processing. His world was collapsing. I could see it in his eyes. I translated word for word what they had said. The $240,000, the house, the divorce plan, the previous victims, everything. Robert listened with his face getting whiter and whiter, his hands clenched on the table, his knuckles white, his whole body trembling. Then I took out the documents, the newspaper articles, the photos of Fiona and Eleanor with different names, the statements from the other victims, the records of the fake accounts. Everything Ted had compiled for weeks. I placed it in front of Robert. In front, I told him to look, to read, to see who the woman he had married really was. Robert took the papers with trembling hands. He read. His eyes scanned every line, every photo, every irrefutable proof that his wife was a professional swindler, a criminal, a lie with legs. When he got to the photos of the arrest in Argentina, something in him broke. He dropped the papers. He covered his face with his hands, and he started to cry. My son, my boy, crying like he hadn't cried since he was little, crying for the love he thought was real, for the life he thought he was building, for the future he had just discovered was an illusion. I got up. I walked around the table. I hugged him. He let me. He clung to me like when he was 5 years old and had nightmares, like when his father abandoned us, like when the world was too big and I was his only refuge. I told him I was sorry, that I wished I had been wrong, that I wished Fiona had been real, but that I couldn't let him lose everything without doing anything, that I was his mother, that my job was to protect him, even if it meant breaking his heart, even if it meant being the bearer of the worst news of his life. Robert pulled away from me. He wiped his tears. He asked me what else there was. I told him about the transfer, the $50,000 Fiona had moved yesterday, to an offshore account. I showed him the records Martha had given me. Robert took out his phone. He opened his banking app. He checked. And there it was. The transfer. $50,000. Disappeared. The first step of the plan. The beginning of the theft. His face transformed. Sadness gave way to something darker. Rage. Contained fury. He asked me what else I had discovered. I told him about Ted, about the investigation, about the other victims, about how Fiona and Eleanor had been doing this for years, in different countries, with different names. Always the same crime, always getting away with it, until now. Robert asked what he should do. I told him we had to act fast, that Fiona probably planned to move more money soon, that we had to freeze the accounts, contact a lawyer, go to the police, present the evidence, stop them before they disappeared. Because that was what they would do. As soon as they sensed danger, as soon as they suspected they had been discovered, they would disappear, like ghosts, as they always had done. I gave him Ted's number. I told him to call him, that he knew what to do, that he had contacts in the police, that he could help us build a solid case. Robert nodded. He dialed the number with trembling hands. He spoke with Ted. He listened. He took notes. When he hung up, he looked at me with a mixture of pain and determination. He told me Ted would come in 1 hour, that we would go to the police station together, that we would present everything, the recording, the documents, the transfer, everything. He asked me how I had known, how I had discovered all this. I told him about the dinner, about how I had heard them speaking in Italian, about how I had kept my secret for years, about how that silence had become my most powerful weapon. Robert looked at me differently, as if he were seeing a person he didn't know, as if his invisible mother had suddenly come to life. Form, power. He told me he was sorry, that he had been a bad son, that he had left me behind, that he had prioritized Fiona over me, that he had let her push him away from me, that he should have listened when I tried to warn him, even though I had never directly warned him, even though I had always kept my doubts to myself, because that is how mothers are, quiet until there is no other choice but to speak. I told him he didn't have to apologize, that he had done what any man in love does, trust, hope for the best, that it wasn't his fault for having been manipulated by professionals, by women who had spent years perfecting their crime, their act, their art of destroying lives. Ted arrived exactly 1 hour later. It was the first time Robert met him. They shook hands. Ted showed him more evidence, more connections, more victims, more proof that Fiona and Eleanor were part of an international marriage fraud network. Robert listened to everything with a clenched jaw, with dry eyes now. There were no more tears, only determination, only need for justice. The three of us went to the police station together. Robert filed the formal complaint. Fraud, theft, identity theft. The detectives listened to the recording. They reviewed the documents. They contacted Interpol. They discovered that Fiona and Eleanor had outstanding arrest warrants in 2 countries, that they had been on the run for years, that they had finally been found. Thanks to a mother who refused to remain silent, to a mother who turned her invisibility into her superpower. The detectives said they would arrest Fiona and Eleanor that very night. Robert gave them the address of his house, the house he had bought dreaming of a future that never existed. The detectives told him not to go back there, to stay somewhere else, that they would handle everything. Robert nodded. He looked at me. He asked me if he could stay with me, in my small, old apartment. I said yes. Of course, yes. Always yes. That night, Robert slept on the couch in my apartment, the same couch where he had slept so many times as a child, where he did his homework, where we watched movies on Sundays. He was back. Broken, destroyed, but back. And I was there. As I had always been, as I always would be. I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake in my bedroom listening to his uneven breathing. I knew he wasn't really sleeping. I knew he was lying there in the dark, processing everything. The deception, the betrayal, the humiliation, how he had been so blind, how he hadn't seen the signs, how he had handed over his entire life to a lie. At the hour of 0:03, I received a call from one of the detectives. They told me they had arrested Fiona and Eleanor, that they found them packing, preparing to flee. They had plane tickets for tomorrow morning. Destination Spain. From there, they would probably disappear again. Change identities, look for the next victim. But they couldn't anymore. They had been captured. I told Robert in the morning. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, as if he had no emotions left, as if he was empty inside. We had breakfast in silence, coffee and toast, like when he was little, like when it was just the two of us against the world. We had returned to that place, but now he was a destroyed man, and I was the woman who had saved him. The following days were a legal chaos. Lawyers, statements, interviews with the police. The media found out. The story came out in the news. Mother discovers marriage fraud plan and saves her son. They sought me out for interviews. I refused all of them. I didn't want fame. I didn't want recognition. I just wanted Robert to be safe. The legal process lasted months. Fiona and Eleanor were formally charged. They would face charges in multiple countries. The other victims also started coming forward to tell their stories, to seek justice. Robert recovered his $50,000. The transfer was reversed. The house was completely in his name. He started the divorce proceedings, annulment of marriage for fraud, everything. During that time, Robert lived with me. He returned to my small apartment, to my simple life. He became my son again, not the distant man who visited me out of obligation, but my boy, my Robert. We had breakfast together. We had dinner together. We talked. We really talked, for the first time in years. He asked me about Italy, about those 15 years he never knew about. I told him everything. How I got there after his father left us. How I worked cleaning houses for Italian families. How I learned the language in the streets, in the markets, with the women who taught me while I mopped their floors. How I eventually got a better job. How I saved every dollar to come back and give him a better life. Robert cried when I told him. He told me he never knew how much I had sacrificed, how much I had left behind, how much I had suffered in silence. I told him that's what mothers do, suffer in silence, sacrifice themselves without asking for recognition, protect even if no one sees it, love even if it is not reciprocated. Because a mother's love does not seek reward, it only seeks for her children to survive. One day Robert asked me why I hadn't told him about Italy before, why I had kept that secret for so long. I told him the truth, that he never asked, that he was always so busy with his own life that he never had curiosity about mine, that I had become invisible to him, and that invisible people keep secrets, not out of malice, but because no one is interested in listening to them. That destroyed him. He realized how much he had ignored me, how much he had taken me for granted, how he had allowed Fiona to erase me from his life. He apologized to me. He cried in my arms like when he was a child. He promised me he would never make me invisible again, that he would never leave me behind again, that he had learned the most painful lesson of his life, that the only person who truly loved him unconditionally was me, his mother, the woman he had forgotten. Fiona and Eleanor were sentenced to 8 years in prison. 8 years for multiple charges of fraud, swindling, document forgery. They would be deported to Argentina after serving their sentence. They could never return. The other victims also received some justice. Some recovered part of their money. Others at least had the closure of knowing that the criminals who destroyed them would finally pay. Robert sold the house. He said he couldn't live there, that every corner reminded him of the lie, the deception. He bought a smaller apartment, simpler, close to mine. Now we see each other 3 times a week. We have breakfast on Sundays. We have dinner on Wednesdays. We talk on the phone every day. I have become a part of his life again. I am no longer invisible. 2 weeks ago, Robert met someone, a woman from his work. Her name is Alexandra, like my friend. He says she is different, that she is real, that he is taking it slow, that he learned not to trust blindly, that now he asks questions, that he observes, that he listens to his gut, and that he wants me to meet her from the beginning, that my opinion matters, that he will never make important decisions again without talking to me first. Yesterday he confessed something to me. He told me that for months he had nightmares, that he dreamed of Fiona emptying his accounts, destroying his life, leaving him with nothing, that he would wake up sweating, trembling, but that in every nightmare, in the end, I appeared, that my voice would wake him up, that my hands would pull him out of the darkness, that I had saved him in more ways than I knew. I told him that's what mothers do, appear in the darkness, pull their children out of the abyss, even if no one sees them, even if no one recognizes them, even if they are invisible to the rest of the world. For their children, they are always there, in the nightmares, in the difficult moments, in the silence, waiting, observing, protecting. This morning I woke up and found a letter under my door. It was from Robert, handwritten. It said things he had never told me, that I was the strongest woman he knew, that his heroine didn't wear a cape. She wore a grey dress and carried an old purse, that his heroine had been invisible all her life, but that now he saw her, that he would always see her, that he would never forget her again, that I had given him life twice, once when he was born, and again when I saved him from marrying a lie. I cried reading that letter. I cried for the years of loneliness, for the years of being ignored, forgotten, discarded. But I also cried with happiness, because finally my son saw me. He valued me. He loved me the way I always needed to be loved, with presence, with gratitude, with recognition of everything I always did in silence. Now when I look in the mirror, I no longer see an invisible woman. I see a warrior, a woman who speaks 3 languages, who lived in another country, who raised a son alone, who worked until she broke to give him everything, who saved him from a deadly trap using only her intelligence and her love. I see a woman who deserves to be seen, who deserves to take up space, who deserves to be heard. And my name is no longer just Mum. My name is Susan Fields, 61 years old, survivor, fighter, mother, woman who refused to stay silent when her son was in danger, woman who turned her invisibility into power, her silence into strategy, her love into salvation. They thought I was a silly old woman who didn't understand anything. They thought I was invisible, insignificant, easy to ignore. But they were wrong, because mothers never sleep. They always observe. They always protect. And when they wake up, the world trembles. My story is just beginning. Because now I know who I am. I know what I'm worth. And I will never let anyone make me invisible again. Never again.